we as Catholics are all very well aware of the rather broad liturgical spectrum that exists within Holy Mother Church. And with that come different expressions and different things that are proper or improper to certain parishes, certain rites of the Mass, certain forms of the Mass. But as the universal Church, shouldn't there be things that are universal? The answer, very surprisingly, is yes, and we will cover that in this segment. I'm Jacob McCarthy. This is Foundations of Faith. Welcome back to Foundations of Faith. So, we oftentimes can ask ourselves, why? What is this that makes us do different things during Mass? Why are there different things that are proper to certain Masses and certain parishes at certain times? And why does it really matter? Well, it matters because it's Mass. It's the most important thing that ever happens on the face of the earth. And so I'm going to go into three things that are the most important. So, demeanor, dress, and definitely never ever do's. So, to begin, depending on where you are, certain things will be required or expected, and certain things won't be. So if you're at a Tridentine Latin Mass, it's going to be a lot more stuff happening than at a traditional Novus Ordo. If you're at a Divine Worship Ordinariate Mass, it will be very similar to a Latin Mass. If you're at a Eastern Rite Byzantine Mass, well, that'll also come with its own different trappings and obligations for demeanor and such. But there are things that are universal, or at the very least ought to be universal, no matter where you find yourself, because the Mass is the Mass. It cannot be cheapened. You can't take the Mass and say, nah, we're going to do it here. You can be irreverent, but the Mass isn't inherently cheapened. You can make a mockery of the Mass, but the Mass is still not inherently cheapened. If I make fun of a $100 bill, it's still worth $100. So the Mass is always worth what it's worth, which is an infinitely more potent amount of worth than a million $100 bills. So, how should our demeanor be at Mass? Well, first off, act as if you're in the court of a king. You are in the temple of God. Act like it. When you enter the church, before you get into your pew, genuflect. Now, women can get away with the half genuflection curtsy thing because they're women. A curtsy is actually a show of honor from women traditionally. Men, if your knee does not touch the ground and you don't have some sort of physical issue that prevents that, it doesn't count. Men, your knee should touch the ground when you genuflect. You're a man. Kneel. There are certain times when it is proper to bow. There are certain times when it's proper to kneel. The main ones are illustrated in the Mass. So, men and women, again, this is just in general. If you have some sort of physical condition, that's obviously excluded. When it's time to kneel, you kneel. You don't rest on the pew, sit on the pew plus you're kneeling. You kneel. Simple as that. Jesus died the most horrific death in history for you. You can kneel for 5 minutes. It's not that big of a deal. When you sit, don't slouch. Don't just be sort of bored. Don't be constantly looking around how can I pass the time until Father's done giving this awfully dull and dreary homily? I'm so done. I could be watching football right now. Well, okay. If you're at Mass, be at Mass. Be present. You don't want to be on a date and the other person doesn't really want to be there. If you don't want to be at Mass, why are you going? If you are at Mass, be present. Be there. Speaking of dates and being present, how you dress also matters. Now, the virtue of modesty is not simply be covered. It's not simply don't be. It's not a simple sexual thing. We say that mostly because it's generally what we have nowadays. But modesty is dressing appropriately for an occasion, and also acting appropriately for an occasion. So if you're going to a gala, well, you don't want to go in sweats and a t-shirt. Well, that's immodest. So if you're going to mass, don't go in sweats and a t-shirt. Now, modesty for men and women does look different. Men, when we're immodest, we tend to just be sloppy. We wear again, pair of sweatpants, or like a sweatshirt that probably hasn't been washed in a little too long. Generally, men tend towards sloppy. Men don't do that. I can guarantee, men, going to go on a date, you would spend at least half an hour getting ready. You'd want to make sure that you're properly shaven. You want to make sure that you have your hair combed. You have a nicer shirt. Maybe you pressed your pants for the first time in your life. Well, if you're going to do that for a girl, for a date, or if you're going to spend even more time than that on prom, or homecoming, or any type of benefit dinner or gala, spend a little bit of that time on our Lord. Get ready for mass, because I've been to a lot of benefits. I've been to a lot of dances. I've been to a lot of very fancy events. I enjoy them. None of them are even a minute fraction as important, as elevated as mass. Women, dress properly. I guess obviously, be modest in the more sexual sense. But also, something that's a dress that might be appropriate for hanging out with your friends going to the mall might not be appropriate for mass. Again, it's about deference to God. So your prom dress, for instance, maybe it's a full-length gown. You wouldn't want to wear it to mass, generally, because it's a very ostentatious outfit. I have a tuxedo tail suit that I have. It's got the tailcoat, the white vest, all of it, like what you see on Downton Abbey or something. I would never wear that to mass. I dress nicely. I wear suits to mass. I dress well for mass. But I don't dress so well that it would distract from mass. And not in a sexual sense, but just in like a, wow, look at how nice that is. Because you can distract from mass in a million different ways. Men and women, dress well. Dress appropriately for mass. More important than any dance, benefit, dinner, date, anything you'll ever go to. Nothing will ever be as important as mass. Dress like it. And finally, the big don'ts, the big never do's. So number one, and I'm not thinking of anyone in particular when I say this. None of these am I thinking of anyone specific. Okay, no offense, I'm not really looking at you during mass. I don't really pay attention to you during mass. I'm looking at the altar. But I've been to a lot of parishes. I've been stationed at a lot of parishes. I've worked at a lot of parishes. And so I know in general the universal things people tend to do that you shouldn't during mass. One, don't be on your phone. If your phone is on your person, well, it should be powered off. You should not be touching it during mass. Definitely don't have it out. Preferably, leave it at home, leave it in the car. I generally leave my phone in the office or in my car or in my apartment when I go to mass. Now, another big don't, and this is a bit more of a contentious one, the orans posture. The orans posture is when the priest does this. That's fine if you want to do that. It's a beautiful thing to do. It is a lovely gesture of prayer that is encouraged, actually, but not during Mass. During Mass, it is only the priest who's supposed to have his hands apart like this, or like this, or like this, or like this, whatever he's doing. Different priests do different things. The laity, even the deacon doesn't do it during Mass. The laity, the servers, those of us who are not the priest, are never, during Mass, to have our hands like this. That is because in Catholic teaching, it says the orans posture is meant to be the gesture of the intercessor, meaning the person who's doing like the actual offering is supposed to be the only one who does it. So when you're at home praying in privately, when you're praying with some other people, like you're the one leading prayer and you want to do that, that's fine. That's totally allowed. But during Mass, the only person who is actually doing the offertory, the intercessory, the sacrifice of the Mass is the priest, and so it is improper. It is immodest for anyone other than the priest to do this during Mass. Any other time you want to do it, go ahead. Any other time, feel free. I do it in private prayer all the time. During Mass, it is not to be done by the laity. I'm pretty sure I've covered the main big ones. So just to recap, act well, dress well, and don't be on your phone. Don't do what priests only are supposed to be doing. The Mass is the most important event ever. No other event, no election, no coronation, no war, nothing could ever be as monumentally important as the Holy Mass. Act and dress as people who understand that. Even if you don't understand that or believe it, actually, if you start acting and dressing the part, you'll start to believe it more. So please treat the Mass with the dignity and respect it is owed. It is due. And as always, have a wonderful and blessed week. Cheers.